Hey everybody, this is Blake here. I'm going to be reviewing The Raven. This was a movie that I wanted to see, but I also had really low expectations for. On one hand, I like the premise. I like the cast, even though I usually wouldn't see movies just because of them. I always like that kind of setting, that old-fashioned setting. Works really good for horror films. I'm a huge fan of like those 60s horror movies with Vincent Price and Peter Cushing. I wish more horror films were period pieces like that. But at the same time, you know, the trailer just, I don't know, something about it seemed kind of mediocre. And with the director, James McTeague, or McTeague, I don't know how to pronounce his name, yeah, he's done good movies, but I'm not really sure if he deserves credit for them, because I've always felt that he was a puppet director for the Wachowski brothers. He did V for Vendetta and Ninja Assassin. Now, V for Vendetta is a good movie, a genuinely good movie. And Ninja Assassin, it's not good, but it's really entertaining. But the way he came out with these movies, just, I don't know, it always screamed puppet director to me. And usually what happens is you have a big director, they make a movie that flops, so to prove that their career isn't completely derailed yet, they'll produce a movie and the marketing will really whore out their name, even though they aren't the director. And if the movie's a success, they get the credit, but if it fails, it seems like the director gets the blame. And then they could either repeat that process or make a movie of their own. M. Night Shyamalan, for example, after The Last Airbender, he came out with Devil. I always felt that it really whored out his name in that movie. But I don't really remember how that was received, so I don't know if that completely worked out or not for him. But, well, for example, though, with the Wachowski brothers, you know, they did The Matrix, which is really loved by everybody. Matrix Reloaded, which got reasonably good reviews. But then The Matrix Revelations split its audience, and I didn't care for it too much, and a lot of people didn't. Almost everybody was disappointed with it. And so how do they follow that one up? With V for Vendetta. Now, if you remember when V for Vendetta came out, you wouldn't know who the James McTeague was. They only marketed the Wachowski brothers. They marketed it so much that, honestly, until Ninja Assassin came out, I always thought that they were the directors. And it just goes to show, you know, marketing can really work that way. And V for Vendetta, even though it wasn't a huge financial success, it got really good reviews and a lot of people liked it. So it seems like they always get the credit for that movie. But then they made Speed Racer, which was a bomb, and so then they followed that up with Ninja Assassin, which once again they did not direct, they only produced. Although V for Vendetta, at least I believe they wrote it. I'm not completely sure about that. But Ninja Assassin was not a success, but it was one of those movies that it had its audience, but just you never really heard much from them. It got pretty bad reviews, and it didn't make a lot of money, even though, like I said, I think it's a really entertaining movie. But it seems like when you listen to Wachowski brothers fans, they always seem to list V for Vendetta as one of their movies, as if they did direct it, but they always are quick to blame the director for Ninja Assassin, which is bullshit, because if you read anything about the production of that movie, most of the problems with Ninja Assassin came from the Wachowski brothers really fast-tracking the script. So they clearly had creative control over the director, and unfortunately backfired. And it pisses me off that people are quick to praise them for V for Vendetta, but then will completely ignore the fact that they were responsible for the problems for Ninja Assassin. So with James McTeague, back to him, is he a puppet director or not? With this movie, which I haven't at least seen any indication that the Wachowski brothers were involved, I'm going to presume that, yeah, he does have talent. I think he did a great job on this movie. It's not a great movie, but I do think it is a good movie. And considering how bad the reviews were for this, I'm really surprised, because a lot of what I liked about this movie should be what the critics would like too. One of the major problems with it is that it's a typical cat and mouse thriller when you think about it. I mean, it's not that much different from a movie like Gone or I don't know. I can't really think of any more examples right now, but these movies, they always seem to have the same kind of narrative. The protagonist gets involved with the case, they find some clues involving the killer, they track down those clues, but then it leads to some sort of chase scene, and then the killer gets away, but it turns out that the killer was actually leading them to that point. And it's really contrived, pretty absurd, but it's also one of those narratives that it never seems to get completely old if the execution is good enough. And this movie, I thought, had pretty good execution. One thing that I really appreciated about it, even though a lot of people actually disagree with me here, is I thought there was a lot more attention to the characters. For example, Edgar Allan Poe in this movie, you see a lot of different sides to him. When you first are introduced to him, he's kind of an ass, a very pompous, drunken ass. And when you see him again after that, you see that he's really witty, and he's still kind of a sarcastic smartass, but he's not a bad person. And then when you see him again later on, you see his romantic side and his softer side. And I thought they did a good job at portraying him as a good person, but a person with many flaws. And I thought they did that with the other characters too, but much more, subtly. The father, or not the father-in-law, but the main love interest's father, he's kind of an asshole when we see him for the most part, but we also see that he does care for his daughter, might have good reason to dislike Poe, and you even see throughout the movie that he does have a heroic streak. But a lot of people obviously didn't agree with me there, and I think the main reason I liked this movie is because I did make a connection to the characters. I cared for what happened to them, and one thing that I really had to give it credit for is that it made me care for the love story. The love interest isn't especially well developed or fleshed out. She's just your typical, love interest. But, something about their romance, it moved me. I don't know really why, but there was a lot more focus on it than most of these movies have. Unfortunately, this is at the cost of pacing, when it comes to the first act anyway. Because pretty much the pacing goes like this. You'll have the killer kill somebody, and that's pretty interesting, obviously. The detective or the other characters will, decipher clues or whatever. Really interesting stuff. It's moving the story along. Then they'd have a scene with John Cusack or Edgar Allan Poe and his love interest, and they're dancing or talking and being all lovey and whatever. And that kind of stops the pacing dead in its tracks. I was thinking maybe if they could have maybe had the more romantic stuff from the very beginning and then move up to the thriller storyline, maybe that would have helped, maybe not, I don't know. But the first act of this movie was very choppily paced. The only character I felt wasn't very fleshed out was the detective. And it's not that the character is really boring, but he's only interesting because I like the actor, Luke Evans. He kind of reminds me of Orlando Bloom, but with more personality, and I thought he was really compelling and fun to watch. But the character itself is just your typical detective role. I would have liked to see more about him. But the characters, like I said, I thought they were all interesting, and I cared for them. John Cusack actually acts for once. It's been so long since I've seen a John Cusack movie where he's not just John Cusack half-assing it. He's one of those guys who he has a nice personality for any kind of movie, and I rarely consider him to be the weakness of any movie. Like 2012, I thought he did fine, but the character was so flat that it didn't really matter. But in this one, he really throws himself into the role, has a lot of fun with it, and the role of Edgar Allan Poe is interesting in general. He's really witty. I like his dialogue. It always seems like something the real Edgar Allan Poe would say. And so, I guess moving on, I thought the actors did a great job in their roles. I thought the characters were interesting enough that I was interested in what was going on. But once it gets going, it never stops. It just becomes a great thrill ride full of suspense, tension, atmosphere. I always love those old settings, the creepy fog, the menacing buildings. I always wish more movies would take place 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But it's all CGI, but it adds to it. I thought the movie kind of had almost a comic book feel about it, sort of like V for Vendetta. In fact, you could see some stylistic inspirations from that, especially with the killer's design. And I'm not sure if this was actually based off any comic book, like From Hell is based off a real story, but it's a comic book movie. This one is not based off a real story, but it does take elements from real life events and incorporates them here, and I thought they did a good job with that too. But it does kind of feel like a comic book movie, but once again, I think its strength lies within it. I thought the characters were interesting, and I thought the movie had a tight enough narrative that once it gets going, I was constantly interested. The direction, I think, is really sharp, very stylish, but not overblown. I like how each chase sequence has sort of its own setting. Like you have a stage sequence, which is really exciting. At one point, they're chasing the killer, and it's like in the early daylight, and there's fog all around. I thought that was kind of an interesting aesthetic. There was one other that I really liked too. There's this. It's not a catacombs, but it was like in these underground tunnels. I like that kind of stuff. I think it makes for a very diverse and fresh movie. It never becomes redundant for me, even though the story is sort of like, same thing. They find a clue, they track it down, leads to a chase sequence, they fail, and it turns out the killer had led them into some trap or whatever. But the settings themselves change so much that I thought it made it really interesting to watch and look at. So I think that's really all I have to say. If you want to read my written review, just check the link in my description. If I were to rate it as either a full price matinee rental TV or avoid at all cost, I'd say it's a matinee. I think it's worth watching in the theaters, even though you don't really have to. But I thought it was a good thriller, an underrated thriller, and you should all give it a look at least some point. So I'll see you guys later.